Well, greetings, and how wonderful to see you all here instead of off campus, as we say, which is where you usually are when I have joined you. And as I do each year, I want to, first of all, say thank you to you for your interest and for your willingness to pay your own way here and attend a conference that is really going to shore you up and give you the information you need to talk to your friends and neighbors. I was just talking to a reporter outside the room, and he said, "Why is a conference like this important?" I said, "Let me tell you why. Fewer and fewer people believe what they hear on the evening news. And they listen to it with skepticism and doubt. But you know who they do believe? They believe their neighbors and friends. And I bet if I ask for a show of hands, how many of you every day get an email, hear from a friend, go to church and somebody says, "Look at this that I read on the internet. Is this true? What do you know about this?" The most important name in news now is not ABC, which I still call them the All About Clinton News Network, or NBC, or CBS, or CNN. It is the YOU. It is you and your circle of friends. That is who you're listening to. That is who they are listening to. They're listening to you. So I applaud you for being here. I thank you so much for your heartfelt interest. And I encourage you in getting the education that you need to help individuals know what is a constitutional, truthful vote. What is a constitutional, truthful position? And having them understand that indeed elections have consequences, and who is in charge matters, and who you're listening to makes a difference. I see Tommy Waller. If I want to know something about Israel, I know who to call. And these are people that you rely on because they are your friends. So thank you for that. Now, what I thought I would do today, a little bit different from what I've talked with you about in past years. Coming to the Senate, and you're going to get to hear from some of these senior senators who've been plowing away on issues here in the Senate. I thought I would recap for you what I think are the top 10 most important items that I have worked on since coming to the Senate. Then I'm going to yield the floor to some of these other guys. But you know, it's always good to hear from a good, solid conservative woman first, right? Of course. I tell my family all the time I'm the chief mama in charge, and what I say goes. So here you go, the way I'm spending my time. The Title X Abortion Provider Prohibition Act. When I chaired the Select Investigative Panel looking into what was happening with Planned Parenthood, one of the things, you know, in the videos, and then we came up, figured out they were selling baby body parts. What we did was to put in place legislation that backs up what the president has done by executive order. It simply says this: Title X funding will go to its stated statutory purpose, which is to clinics that provide women's health care. And if you provide abortion services, you're not going to get that. So, but the Title X Prohibition and the Protecting Life and Taxpayers Act, these two pieces of legislation, two of the first things that I did in coming to the Senate, because stating that we are indeed here to protect life and liberty. Oh, yeah, what was that? The first thing? Life. So those are our first two things that we have worked on. Third, last month I filed the Campus Free Speech Resolution of 2019. This is You are so welcome. And I've talked with a lot of college students. You know, it's inconceivable to us that in this day and age, that having diversity of thought would be considered to be harmful. And that students and professors are arguing about encouraging people to hear different points of view. So we have this, and it backs up many of our conservative groups. The fourth thing, in Judiciary Committee, we are doing hearings and addressing social media bias, and I am going to chair a working group in the Senate Judiciary Committee that will look at the issues of privacy, data security, antitrust, and online censorship. We think it's important that we hold these online platforms accountable and that they move away from subjectively manipulating those algorithms that boot out conservative speech. Number 5, judicial confirmations. How do you like these new federal judges? Isn't that great? So far, we have confirmed 123 federal judges, and in Judiciary Committee today, we moved 4 more out to go to the floor. So President Trump has set quite a record on this, and we really do support what he's doing. Number 6, defending Israel. This is Senate Bill 1. Passed early this year, and item number 7 on my list, fighting BDS, and Senate Resolution 120. Number 8, defending Christians in Sri Lanka. Important that we weighed in on that. Number 9 is something we're continuing to work on even today, keeping maximum pressure on Iran and making certain that we support the president when he put these sanctions in place. Iran's economy is beginning to crumble, and don't let anybody tell you this is a new problem. This has been going on since the 70s. And we know that Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. And I thought it was interesting, the Washington Post even reported that Hezbollah was complaining that Iran had cut off some of their money flow. So Hezbollah couldn't carry out their bad deeds. So we're going to keep the pressure on. And number 10 is one that we have just done today, the National Defense Authorization Act, making certain that our men and women in uniform have what they need to carry out the job that they're supposed to do. Thank you all so much for letting me be with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Patrick Pertil. I'm Director of Legislative Affairs for the Faith and Freedom Coalition, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce your next speaker. I think probably all of you will know him already, but let me say a few words. U.S. Senator Mike Lee was first elected to the Senate in 2010. Since then, he has been, as he was before coming to the Senate, he's been a leader on all of the issues that we care about. He was an accomplished attorney in private practice, a Supreme Court litigator before he came here, so it's no surprise that he landed on the Senate Judiciary Committee, where you have probably seen him in some made-for-TV specials like the Gorsuch hearings and the Kavanaugh hearings, which were all great sport. He has been a leader on a number of issues here. He's a leader on pro-life issues. He's a leader on religious liberty issues here in the Senate. We have worked and been particularly excited to work with him on a lot of criminal justice issues, which President Trump spoke about yesterday, and Matthew Charles also spoke to you a little bit about the First Step Act and what that has accomplished. None of that act would not have been possible without Senator Lee's leadership on the committee, both his commitment to the issue and to fixing where there are disproportionalities in the system, in the criminal justice system, the prison system. His commitment to that has been steadfast since he's been elected, but it was really not just his commitment to it, but his really smart approach to it. He made sure that it was a bipartisan bill, that it was able to come out of the Judiciary Committee, head to the Senate floor, and ultimately to President Trump's desk. So please join me in welcoming Senator Mike Lee.
I never, ever get people standing for me when I enter a room in this town, so this is unusual for me. When that happens, I look around and I think they must be applauding for someone else. It's so great to be back with you. I love this organization. I love each of you. I love what you do. I love even the name of the organization, the Faith and Freedom Coalition. These are two concepts that define America. And they're two things that cannot exist one without the other. You can't truly be free without faith, and you cannot truly exercise faith without freedom. So in that respect, your organization does exactly what we as Americans do so well, balancing faith with freedom, making sure that they both exist so that either can exist. And when either can exist, so can the other. These are things that are easy to take for granted. And sometimes people do take them for granted. But we have to remember that for most of human history, prior to America's founding, a free conscience was not seen as a fundamental, unmitigated good. It was seen rather as a threat. From ancient tribes to modern empires, governments saw fit to subject the city of God to the city of man. The state decided, in most instances, what consisted of acceptable religion, and it punished whatever was not. Dissenters were punished, and so were worshipers of just about every stripe. Fortunately, our founders saw a better way. Fortunately, our founders envisioned an America, the kind of America that we would later become, the kind of America that we still are and that I hope we always will be. That is, as Americans, we're great not because of who we are, but because of what we do. You see, both faith and freedom are the consequence of a choice. We must choose every day of our lives to be free. We must choose every day of our lives to have faith. So our founding fathers set up a system that would protect both. It was one of the things that they did that was so bold and so brave nearly 2.5 centuries ago. I've talked for a long time and written extensively about our Constitution, and recently I came to believe that there's another document that's sometimes not appreciated as much as it should be, the Declaration of Independence. It's often been said, yes, thank you, I'm glad there are some... It's sometimes been said that the Constitution provides the frame for our freedom. The frame as in around a picture, the structure. But the picture itself is painted by the Declaration of Independence. It's one of the reasons why I recently wrote a book about the Declaration of Independence. It's called Our Lost Declaration. All 12 people who have read Our Lost Declaration have absolutely loved it. I encourage you to become the 13th today. But what they did when they signed their name to that document was, in fact, treason. It was an act of open resistance against not only their own king, their own country, but what was then the world's last standing and greatest superpower. They truly pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. We have to ask ourselves from time to time, why did they do it? Was it worth it? They did it, of course, because of their love of their fellow beings. They recognized what I hope each and every one of us will always be willing to recognize. That is the eternal worth and immortal, immeasurable import of every human soul. That having been created in the image of God, we are entitled to be treated with respect and dignity, and we must treat each other that way every day. One of my favorite Frenchmen of all times, Alexis de Tocqueville, understood that our religion, our belief in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even the Lord God Jesus Christ, was the source of our strength. As he toured America and tried to explain why it is that the revolution had stuck here, why it is that it worked here, why it was that we were allowed and able to be free and equally treated under a fair, just system of laws. He explained as follows, quote, "Freedom regards religion as the companion in all its battles and all its triumphs, as the very cradle of its infancy and the source of all its claims, because religion alone is the safeguard of morality, and morality is the best and surest pledge for the survival of freedom." We managed as a country to hold on to these emblems, these remembrances, these reminders of the fact that what makes us great is the choice we make every day to follow our God. It's been said, I believe by Winston Churchill, that we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us. As I take the time to give constituents from my state and around the country tours of this great building, I'm often drawn to a couple of pieces of artwork that often go unnoticed. Both were made by Italian-born immigrants to the United States who were hired on as artists for the decoration of the Capitol. One was by Enrico Causicchi, who made this great sculpture that often goes unnoticed. It currently stands in Statuary Hall, also known as the former House Chamber. Liberty and the Eagle consists of a figure, I believe, representing liberty, with her right arm outstretched holding a scroll, most likely representing the Constitution. To her right is an eagle, representing far-seeing vision and strength. To her left is a fasces, a bundle of sticks representing e pluribus unum, representing the fact that we're greater, we're stronger than the sum of our parts. Normally, a fasces is held together by leather straps, by ropes, or by cords of some sort. In this instance, the fasces is held together by a snake. I was alarmed by this sculpture when I first got here. I didn't know entirely what to make of it, until someone explained to me a hypothesis that perhaps, maybe just maybe, this is channeling the words of Jesus from Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, admonishing Jesus' followers to be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. You see, we have to trust and love your neighbor, but also cut the cards. Could it have been that the founders of our great country, including those who adorned its public buildings in the early part of our republic, understood this great truth, that the Republican form of government, any form of government that recognizes freedom and protects and professes the right to believe in Almighty God as each person deems appropriate, is itself wonderful and very fragile, is at once the source of our strength and our biggest potential vulnerability. Another one of these sculptures representing the same thing can be found at the opposite end of the building, on the Senate wing, in something called the Bromidi Corridor. The artist there, Constantino Bromidi, displays a cherub surrounded on one side by a snake and on the other side by a dove. We have to remember the important choice to be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves every single day. And so I hope we can choose every day to maintain the strength of our republic, to do so by choosing virtue, by making the choice between right and wrong and choosing to interact with each other in a way that properly reflects all of Jesus' teachings, including those to love one another. I bear testimony that God lives, that he is aware of and loves each and every one of us, that Jesus is the Christ, that he in fact died for us, that he paid the price for our sins, that he suffered for all humanity so that we might be free and we might return to live with him once again. I bear that testimony in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
So we'll let another day, we'll have Senator Lee, the constitutional expert, explain why someone like that is legally allowed to say something like that in a building like this. So this, hopefully this is encouraging to you. It's informational. It's current. I mean, literally off of the Senate floor. Like Senator Blackburn alluded to earlier, we do it in a hotel, large crowd, big stage and stuff. But I really love having this element, because I think that it not only does it allow us to be able to come into our Capitol, but honestly, it allows elected officials, like you just heard, to kind of lay it out right here in front of everybody, that this is who we are, this is what we believe, this is what we stand for, and we're not checking that at the door, right? So speaking of not checking anything at the door, any Oklahomans, family friends of Oklahomans? We got an Oklahoman on the front row over here. So that is God's country, and this is hard as a native Texan for me to say this, but God's country. But it's easier for me to say because he's married to a former Baylor Bear, and as you heard earlier when I talked about Dr. Paul, I think one of the clarion voices in American politics on these issues is our next speaker. Background as a minister that I think I'll tell you a little bit about, but he has truly influenced the lives of an entire generation of Oklahomans, really throughout the Midwest for that matter. But he worked in youth ministry for years and years, and after interacting literally with hundreds of thousands over the years of high school and college students, Senator Lankford realized that the time is now and the calling is here to come to Washington. Several years ago, as a member of the United States House of Representatives, James Lankford moved in and became a staunch and reliable voice on these issues. In the last couple of years, he's taken that voice across Capitol Hill into the Senate. So would you join me in welcoming our friend, Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma?
No need to stand and clap, and just unless you need to stand and stretch, be able to go. So let me clarify something on this God's country issue. In Oklahoma, we have more barbecue restaurants in Oklahoma than any other state in America per capita. Okay, so lots of other folks say they have great barbecue, and I'm okay, fine. Come eat ours, and you'll know the difference. But I joke with folks all the time that as you read through the Old Testament, it always talks about the sweet aroma of the sacrifice coming up. And I always say that even God likes the smell of barbecue. So it is one of those things that is always special for. My background is he was mentioning, it was in ministry. I was 22 years in ministry and served in youth ministry. And depending on your background with your own personal youth minister, to know that a youth pastor is a senator either encourages you or terrifies you, probably, depending on your own personal relationship with your youth pastor. I never expected to be in Congress. This was not in our life plan. This is what my wife calls life's greatest interruption. But in 2008, my wife and I separately sensed God calling us to be able to run for Congress. And we spent about 7 months telling God what a really insane idea that was. And saying over and over again, that's not rational, that's not possible. Because I was a voter, I was engaged in the issues, I was passionate about what was happening in our country, but I spent all my time working with students. I directed some of you may have heard of the Falls Creek Youth Camp. I was the director of the Falls Creek Youth Camp. It's the largest Christian camp in America. We have 5,000 students a week there. It is a very unique place to be able to do ministry. And if you're in youth ministry and you have the opportunity to be able to work with 51,000 students a summer, you take that. And that's my joy to be able to do that. But in 2008 and 9, God was very clear with us to say, I want you to do something different. And honestly, when we started praying about it, I really thought this was going to be an Isaac, Abraham kind of moment. That God was going to say, be faithful to pray about it, go up to Mount Moriah, but at the end, there's the ram. You don't have to kill your career. But we got to Mount Moriah, and he said, no, kill it. We're going to do something different. And at the end of that, we finally had to get to the point to say, I'm going to be an old man one day telling my grandchildren about the time I didn't follow God. This is what God is calling us to do, and I don't know why, but we're going to go do it. Now, I tell you that story because it's not about us, it's about what God has done. But I'm also convinced that I meet people all the time that they say, my family doesn't have any background in politics, I don't have any background in politics, I don't have any money like all these other folks do. There's no way that I could ever get involved in that. But God. So my simple statement to some of you are here because you're grassroots activists, and you're excited about helping someone else. And what you're really doing is disobeying God because he's telling you not to help someone else. He's telling you to do it. And you're short-circuiting what he's calling you to do. Complete what he's calling you to do. Now, I can't call you. That's not my responsibility. But some of you are not supposed to be helping. You're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be on the school board. You're supposed to be on the city council. You're supposed to be engaged in these issues. I don't know what that is for you, but I would encourage you to not be afraid to follow where God leads you. Don't be afraid to go there. I have folks all the time that say, I'm grateful that there are good people that are in Washington, D.C. because they'll change the country. I will typically smile at them and say politely, Washington doesn't change the country changes Washington. That's how it works. So the grassroots activists, the people that are engaged in the issues, that are actually changing the culture, and that's the family and the church and the communities and the nonprofits that are actually changing culture and engaging, that moves slowly to D.C. and it moves slowly out of D.C. So the transitions that we need to see in D.C. 10 years from now will happen because churches and communities and families are engaging in their local communities now, and that will slowly make it. What's happening in D.C. right now, culturally, is a result of what happened in our country 10 years ago. What would you like to see D.C. like 10 years from now? Transition your communities, engage as the church, activate in real dialogue and conversation, and that's what D.C. will be like 10 years from now. It takes some time, but that's actually the way that it actually moves. Now, there are a lot of critical issues we're working on right now that are exceptionally important to us, those of us who believe in basic freedom, and not everyone up here does. One of my colleagues just 2 weeks ago made a public statement to say people that are pro-life are like racists and anti-Semites. There's no place for them in America. And when she made a statement that pro-life individuals, that there is no place for them in America because they're like racist and anti-Semites, she laid down a gauntlet to say, this is what we believe. We're going to do whatever we can do to silence those of you that believe in the value of children. We will make sure that your voice does not get out there. Because I can't imagine anything worse in America than racism, anti-Semitism, and children. Can you? It's a really odd list to be in, isn't it? For those of you that love the life of a child, to be considered as the group that there is no place for them anymore in America. The way that turns around is not a vote. That's a heart issue. And that's the engagement that we'll have to do culturally in conversations. Right now on university campuses and all this fall, there'll be students standing and screaming in the face of people that they disagree with because they disagree with them, and they're going to work to silence their voice, to make sure they cannot speak. That's a cultural issue. That's an engagement about what is right and what's wrong and what we value. We turn that around not with a vote. We turn that around with individual engagement. Now, there are things like judges that we can work on here. We've got to be able to get good judges in place, people that actually read the law and, crazy enough, follow the law. I know that's a radical concept to some. We've got to get great judges in place, and we're working on that. In fact, the Senate reached a point just a few months ago that we reached the boiling point to say we're going to actually change the rules of the Senate, and I had the joy of leading the effort to be able to shift the rules in the Senate because My Democratic colleagues were blocking every good judge that was coming through, and so we shifted the rules of the Senate to say it doesn't matter who this judge is. If they are qualified, we need to be able to move them through, and we have doubled the number of judges that we're doing now in this basis now to be able to accelerate that. That is exceptionally important for us to be able to do, because we're not looking for judges with a certain opinion other than their opinion is the law. Follow that. We're not looking for certain bias. We're not looking for certain preference towards our point of view. Just follow the law, and we'll try to do the same. It's the most basic aspect that we can do in culture. Now, there's lots of things that we can work on. They provide religious liberty, and they provide engagement in our community, but there is no substitute for us engaging with our neighbors. So let me just say this thing to you. Thank you for coming here and for encouraging members of Congress and our staff in the task that we're doing, because seeing you is an encouragement to us to be able to keep going, to be able to know there's people in my state in Oklahoma, God's country, as you've already heard, that are passionate about trying to do the right thing the right way. But it's good to know there's folks from all over the country that are also doing that. But again, there is no substitute for just having that dialogue at home with family, with friends, with neighbors, and not having an expectation that if I elect somebody, they'll go do my job. I have a job. So do you. Let's go follow God together and to see how we can serve our country and our neighbors and to see where this takes us in the days ahead. Is that a deal with you? Let's go do it together. Thanks for engaging.
Now, if you ever, for even a second, think that what you do to pray and work to see God glorified in the civic arena, if you think it doesn't make a difference, I want you to think about what you just heard. It makes a difference. I can tell you when I came here to Washington and worked in the Senate, I'm not going to say how many years ago it was, 37. There wasn't anybody in the Senate like him. And now I think it would be fair to say there are a good number.
There are several, yeah.
And we are fortunate to have a man like this in the U.S. Senate fighting for us every single day. And it is a bit of a cliche to say doing the Lord's work in the devil's city, but in this case it applies.
It's true, yeah.
And he has generously agreed to stay and take a few questions. So anybody have a question for Senator Lankford? I think we're getting handheld mics right here. Patrick, we have one right here.
This is my moment as a pastor. I get to say, yes, I see that hand. I see that hand. Yes, 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 I see that hand.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Senator Lankford. Ramon Buehler with the Madison Coalition. President Trump talked in his inaugural address about taking power out of Washington and giving it back to the people. What are some of your ideas about how we can take power out of Washington permanently and give it back to the states and the people?
So it is a great challenge because the executive branch over the decades has been given authority by Congress, and the executive branch only gives that authority up if the executive branch chooses to. Because once the executive branch has the power, you have to have a vote of the House, Senate, and the signature of a president to take it away. That's the catch. It's easy to give power away. It is very difficult to be able to take it back. So here's what President Trump is actively doing right now. He's working on the regulatory side. He made a commitment to say for every one new regulation that goes in, 2 are going to come out. Why is that significant? He's not trying to create chaos in the country. He's trying to say we are overmanaged as a country, where there's a federal bureaucrat trying to look over our shoulder on everything. So 1 reg in, 2 out was a way that he was taking it seriously to say, let's try to start managing this. He actually failed at doing that, I have to tell you, the first year. He didn't do 1 in, 2 out. He did 1 in, 22 out his first year. So you'll hear people say the regulatory state's coming down, and so business is getting more active, and there's more authority back to citizens to be able to make decisions. That's what that really looks like. Again, it's not trying to create chaos. It's trying to say we should trust each other as neighbors. Now, we do need to have some basic boundaries, but trust is important as a community like ours. So.
Thank you, sir, for standing for the Lord and being here. And I felt like one of the questions I wanted to ask is that I want people to pray for our leaders. What are the top things that we can pray for you and your family and the colleagues? Because that's so important that we stand with you in prayer and surround you in prayer.
Bless you for that. So let me give you a couple of quick things to be able to pray for us on. My wife and I, 27 years, we have 2 daughters. This is a place that grinds up families because I'm on the road all the time. So I leave my wife, not really leave, that sounds horrible. So I fly away on Monday mornings. How about that? I get on a plane and fly away from home because in my vernacular, home is where your wife is. And so I fly away on Monday mornings. I'm here all week. I fly home on Thursday or Friday typically each week. Home on the weekend. We'll travel around the state. Then I'll get back again. That's tough. Everybody that does that, they know that's tough. So pray for families that are here. Second aspect, I prayed the prayer of Nehemiah. Nehemiah heard God's call to go govern, basically, when he wasn't a governing person. He was a slave, a cupbearer slave. But he prayed very specifically. He said, God, I need favor with that person. It was, in other words, you've told me to do something. I cannot do it unless you give me favor to accomplish that. So praying for people of faith that are here and say, God, would you give them favor with people? And you see that over and over again in Scripture, where God raised people up, gave them favor to accomplish what needed to be done, even with people that wouldn't typically give favor to. So that's the second one. The third one is pretty straightforward as well. Our lives are so cluttered here with so many distractions. Every time you walk down the hall, the media is asking you to work on what they want you to work on. Are you working on this? Are you working on this? Are you working on this? What they're trying to do is distract all the time to the stuff they care about. Having a focus on what is supposed to be done, not the shiny object of the day, is really key for any of us that do this task. Does that help? Yep.
Hi, how are you? My name's Dylan Lyons. I'm a student from South Texas, and I'm a young person, only 22. So I don't remember the older days.
I have a 22-year-old daughter, by the way.
Oh, well, does she have a phone number?
No.
I assure you, I'm a good church boy.
I might need to see more resume than that. Yeah.
Well, that's my question, actually. So because I'm young, I don't remember what it was like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You have seen the progression of the intersection of faith and politics in our nation for at least your adult life, if not probably your childhood. Sure. And now that you have left them, you're still in the ministry,
I'm still in ministry, yeah.
Right. You're now actively working in politics. I feel in my heart that this is a critical time, a very important time, a time that this is a time 100 years from now in our nation's books. It will be read as one of the most critical moments in our nation's history.
Yep. No, I agree.
Now, am I crazy for thinking that?
No, you're not. You're actually growing into manhood in a moment that is unfamiliar 50 years ago, or 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago. And let me give you some illustrations of that. It wasn't that long ago Bill Clinton was president, and he had a huge issue on the campaign trail because they found out that he one time smoked marijuana. And so he said, but I didn't inhale, because it was like, oh my gosh, this could blow up my whole campaign because I didn't inhale. Now we have 30 states that have legalized marijuana. It's totally different. It wasn't that long ago that Barack Obama was running for president, and he was asked about gay marriage, and he said, I'm opposed to gay marriage. Now, I'm okay with civil unions, but not gay marriage. That was Barack Obama when he was running for president in 2008. Now our culture has dramatically shifted. It wasn't that long ago that it was assumed what religious liberty meant. Now if you say, I stand for religious liberty, they say, that's LGBT bigotry is what you mean by that. That's code word for that. There's an enormous shift that's happened just in our vernacular and in our conversation. As a people, we love God and love people, but we're being put into a box and being pressed in on every side. And so even the dialogue that I have about loving God, about loving people, about standing for religious liberty, about all those things, the culture is trying to define a way. You're that person, you're that person. And even not that long ago, pre-iPhone, which is not that long ago, pre-Facebook, which is not that long ago, people didn't just randomly scream at strangers. Now people get online and randomly scream at strangers. That's a real cultural shift that has occurred. So I find this shocking statement to be true. Scripture is still true. Speaking the truth in love, living out those biblical principles is more stark than ever. And even in the issue of marriage, Paul wrote to a society and was teaching a society about marriage in all of his writings, and was constantly reaffirming marriage because that was such a radical concept in that Roman culture. Fidelity? Psh, who does that in the Roman culture? So he was calling them out to be able to live in such a radical way that they demonstrated their faith. Simple illustration, Peter in his writing, 1 Peter chapter 2, where he says, I pray that he's calling them to live as aliens and strangers in the world, live such good lives among the pagans, so that they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God. It was a transformation, not based on the culture, you're safe in that culture. He was writing to a group of people saying, you're not safe in this culture. So how are you going to live? So that the culture is transformed. It's just a decision you have to make. It is different, though. What else?
Senator, one more?
Okay, sure.
Okay.
I can hang out with this crowd all day. This is fun.
Thank you. I'm Bev Kilmer from Tallahassee, Florida. And
ma'am, it sounds like you're from Tallahassee, Florida. I love
I've
that.
I've heard
accent.
that before.
Come on.
I have a question that is a little different, but I want to know how you and the administration and maybe your colleagues feel about the situation with the education system, the way it is, what our children are being taught, what horrifies us as parents knowing what is being taught. What are your thoughts on maybe moving away from the public classroom and parents forming, I guess you could say, homeschool groups that are backed up by churches or other organizations that give them the support to give the students the education they need, but the parents have control and it becomes their child their way?
Yep, do it. Yeah. So let me make just a couple of quick statements on this. The vast majority of our students in America are educated in public schools. We should not back away and just surrender those, because that is a dramatic shift that happens in culture. We should engage in making sure public school education is the best possible we can. But the best way to do that is not to run it from this city. This city is a worst-case scenario to try to be able to run it. And I think it's really funny when I heard some of the debate from last night, and they were talking about, well, Washington, D.C. should do that. I thought, Washington, D.C. folks are the same as everybody else. Okay, it's not like there's some unique breed that lives in ultra-intelligent Washington, D.C. It's just folks. Putting education as close to that child and as close to the parent as possible is the secret sauce in this. Because if somebody in D.C. 2,000 miles away is the one that's actually watching out for your kid, no one's watching out for your kid. If you put educational control as close as you possibly can, those parents can gather together and saying, how come this classroom is not working out? How come this is not engaged? But all the authority is somewhere else, then that's always going to be a problem. So we passed actually several years ago a shift from No Child Left Behind, which was a very DC-focused educational experiment, to be able to shift to what's called Every Student Succeeds, to shift the authority making. It's one of those, as we were talking about before, the Wall Street Journal called it the largest release of power from Washington, D.C. in decades, where the authority for decision-making for education shifted back to the states. So I encourage anyone on education with that passion to go to your state capital and say, we have the authority to make decisions now on education. Let's do a shift. One of the big changes that occurred in a cultural basis and a civics related was we stopped testing for history and civics. So the focus was on math and science and reading. Those are great disciplines to have, but we left one out, history and civics. When you don't test for that, you don't teach to that, if that's not a high priority. So in our public education, When public schools stopped focusing on education in that area, we lost track of our history and our background because it was de-emphasized. That is a problem for us culturally, and now people can look back and say, our founding fathers were not all that great, and they were terrible, and our socialism has just never been tried the way that we could do socialism, and so socialism and capitalism are basically equivalent, and all these different concepts come up because of just a lack of history and a background on it. So we shouldn't surrender the public school side of it. But coming from Oklahoma, we have a very high percentage of homeschool kids in Oklahoma. In fact, in our state constitution, homeschools are written in as a protection in our state constitution when we were formed as a state. It's a very big deal for us. Christian education, private education, homeschool education should all be protected entities, and there are ways to be able to do that. Ted Cruz has been fantastic on this issue and trying to be able to work through on 529s for homeschool education, that you could use that for college or homeschool or private school. All those are great ideas and things that we can do up here, but ultimately it still boils down to communities of parents taking responsibility for their own kids. I still come back to the same basic concept that we have. Parents have the first responsibility for the education of their kids. And once you surrender that, even in a biblical sense or in an educational sense, you've surrendered a lot. And so the engagement that we have as parents in the education of our children, there just is no substitute for that. So bless you, keep going, and let's just keep cooperating together on it. Yeah, thank you.
So, can we take one more?
Okay, I just got the one more sign. That's all right, Ralph. Balcony, balcony, balcony. Okay. Wait, go ahead.
How is Washington working with ministries such as Operation Underground Railroad to rescue trafficked women and children around the world?
Yeah, great. I'm going to come to this question. That's right over there, too. So her question, if you couldn't hear it, was how is Washington working with human trafficking, operations like Operation Underground Railroad and other folks that are trying to identify? There's actually been quite a few bills. If you can connect with our team, I can actually send you the full list of some of the things that we've done, not only in funding, but in different what's called authorizing language to continue to be able to work to partner together with individual ministries, with nonprofits, with states, with law enforcement training, identifying those that are victims of trafficking. One of the things I just talked to Customs and Border Patrol about that they've been trained on a couple of years ago was identifying people that are being trafficked into the country, being able to see them at airports, in shipyards and places to be able to identify those. They have specialized training and an emphasis to be able to do that at our border ports of entry. That's very significant, and their story that is as quickly as, I heard it yesterday, so it happened on Wednesday, of where they redeemed a Russian woman that was being slipped in, that was being trafficked into the United States for sex trafficking. So this is happening in a regular basis. One of the things that I would say to you on this, on the issue of human trafficking, we need, if you're working in a ministry that area, I'm encouraging ministries to have a broader focus. When we talk about drug trafficking, you'll hear people talk about supply and demand. That we're never going to deal with the supply issue of drugs until we deal with the demand issue of drugs, right? When we talk about sex trafficking, that never comes up. And I think it's a reasonable question to say, why aren't we talking about supply and demand on sex trafficking as well? That is a challenge to be able to push back. That's a challenge to be able to push back on a cultural issue, to say culturally, we're not addressing why are so many men buying young boys and buying women and buying all these areas for trafficking. Why is that happening in our culture, and what are we doing to re-engage with that? Again, that's not something we can vote to solve. That's something we can just bless and encourage and make sure no one's in the way, but empower nonprofits and churches and communities to be able to engage in some of that. Somebody right over here had one more question there, too.
Thank you so much, Senator. There's been a lot of talk today about Supreme Court nominees, Justice Kavanaugh and Gorsuch being most notable. To what extent can you and your conservative colleagues in the Senate and the House push back against judicial supremacy, specifically on abortion? We March for Life every year, and there's a lot of talk